welcome to Word on Wednesday. I'm so glad to be able to continue to walk through Daniel. We only have two more sessions of Daniel, y'all, and then we move on to our Christmas series. Like, it's so crazy how we just went through 12 chapters of Daniel with one another, and I'm excited to go through Daniel chapter 10. You're gonna learn so much from Daniel chapter 10, and I'm pumped. Let me just recap what happened in Daniel chapter 9. So remember, like, Daniel was praying about this captivity to just be over. Like he wanted to be over. It's coming up on this 70 years of desolation for Jerusalem. And so, like, he's just ready for it to be over. So he's pleading with the Lord in prayer. We saw that. And his prayer was just so meaningful and powerful. And then we go into chapter 10, where actually it happens. The desolation of Jerusalem doesn't, but God allows them to go back to rebuild their temple. And so that's really the scene of what's happening there. And so let me just kind of read, because this is also in Ezra, where they also write about them being free and able to go back to rebuild their temple, which I think is so crazy. It's awesome that there are, like, different perspectives. Like, people get to see different angles of it. And so here you have it in Ezra, but Daniel also talks about it too. And so it says this in Ezra. It says, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, the Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm and also put it in writing. This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all kingdoms of the earth and has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem and Judah. Any of his people among you may go up to Jerusalem and Judah and build the temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, the God who is in Jerusalem, and may their God be with them. And so then look what happens, right? That was like the first year. And then look what happens. It says, in the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia. Do you see this? Like, you see Ezra talks about what happens in the first year. Then Daniel is recapping or writing what happens in the third year. So he says, in the third year, king of Persia, a revelation given to Daniel, who was called Belshazzar. Remember, Daniel got that name, Belteshazzar, from King Nebuchadnezzar. And so, like, he's referred back to that name. And then he says, its message was true, and it concerned a great war. The understanding of the message came to him in a vision. And it says in verse 2, at that time, I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice food, no meat or wine touched my lips. I used no lotion at all until the 3 weeks were over. And so there may be a little confusion to see, like, why is Daniel mourning? Like, God's people is now able to go build the temple in Jerusalem. So, like, why is there mourning happening here? Why is he not eating any meat or no wine? Why is he ashy? He's not putting on any lotion. Why is that? Like, you would think that Daniel would be extremely excited about what's taking place, but instead he's mourning for 3 weeks and he's eating no choice food, no meat or wine touched his lips. Why is that? Well, Daniel is extremely upset because not everyone left Babylon to go rebuild God's temple. Not everyone left. In fact, there wasn't very many people that left to rebuild it. People would have rather stayed in Babylon and been complacent. People would have rather stayed in Babylon and remained idle. People fell in love with their wickedness. People were giving into their sin. People were more in love with their sin than God. People were more in love with living in sin than going to go rebuild this temple. So Daniel is staying back to convince others to return back home, to go back to their first love, to go back to the one who loved them first. This a little bit reminds me of Sodom and Gomorrah, when Lot's wife looked back because she wanted to go back to this place that was healthy. And so Daniel is extremely upset about this. He's crying about this. And as we walk into what else is happening here, my challenge for us, my encouragement for us, my big idea is this: serve the Lord. Like, no matter what's happening in life, no matter if the world looks more pretty or whatever the case may be, we have to be reminded to go serve the Lord. It's amazing that Daniel's been praying for this, and it finally happens for them to go rebuild it, and not even a lot of people go. Not a lot of people want to serve the Lord because they're stuck in their idleness. And so the first way to be able to serve the Lord is, number one, don't sit idle. God doesn't call us to be idle. God doesn't call us to be lazy, but God calls us to serve him. In fact, you can read in Genesis, it's starting there, like even before sin crept into the world, like Adam and Eve, they were serving the Lord. Like Adam was naming the animals. He was taking care of the land. He was serving his wife. He was serving the Lord. And God he detests idleness. In fact, 2 Thessalonians 3:6 says, in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, we command you, brothers and sisters, to keep away from every believer who is idle. See, God has given every one of you a gift to serve him. God has given you a gift to prepare a way for him. God has gifted you to help others to know him. But God also gives you a choice in how to use your gifts. And some of you today may be still trapped, maybe still stuck in Babylon, choosing your own desires, using your gifts to chase down money and cars and clothes and possession, running after God's creation, rather running and chasing after and pursuing after God. So your gifts that has been given to you, they should be used to help with addictions that people have. It should help mend broken marriages. It should help restore families. It should help feed the poor and feed the widow, and to love and not hate, to build God's church and add to the kingdom. When we're idle, I think we've made a life that is about us and not about God. When we're idle, we've made life about our desires and not about his desires. And this is what's happened to God's people, to Israel. They're sitting idle, and they would rather follow the ways of this world than to go back and rebuild a temple so they can finally be correct worship in Jerusalem. And so it says in verse 4, on the 24th day of the first month, this is a big deal because he even fasted through Passover. If you know anything about Passover, they celebrated this. This is when they were able to leave Egypt because of Passover, and so they're supposed to celebrate. This is a big celebration, but like Daniel can't celebrate because he's mourning that his people are not going back. And so it says, on the 24th day of the first month, as I was standing on the bank of this great river, the Tigris, I looked up, and there before me was a man dressed in linen with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz. Around his waist, his body was like topaz, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of a multitude. Theologians today believe this to be Jesus in pre-incarnation glory, that and his clothes symbolize something that's extremely important. Like his linen, it's represented to be God's holiness. The belt of gold is represented to be God's sovereignty, that he's in control of everything. The body, like topaz, is his body would resemble God's glory, and his face is like lightning, and it will speak to this man's power, his omnipotence, and his eyes were like flaming torches. This just reflects the penetrating knowledge that he knows all and that he knows everything about you. His eyes burn into your soul, and he understands everything there is to know about you. And his arms and legs are like the gleam of burnished bronze, that ultimately God is just. He is a righteous judge, and he has a wrath for those who choose not to follow him, who choose not to serve him. And it says his voice is like the sound of a multitude. His words sound like just this roar of many waters. So Daniel gets to see this pre-incarnate Jesus, God the Son revealing himself to Daniel. And so in Revelation 1:12, John actually also writes about this. This is one of the reasons why the theologians believe this, but it says this in Revelation 1:12. It says, I turned around to see the voice that was speaking to me. And when I turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands, and among the lampstands were someone like a son of man, dressed in a robe reaching down to his feet, and with the golden sash around his chest. The hair of his head was white like wool and white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. Like, do you see the similarities between the two? His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of rushing waters. And in his right hand, he had 7 stars coming out of his mouth with a sharp double-edged sword. And his face was like the sun shining in its brilliance. It's so similar to what we see in Daniel 10. It seems that Daniel was seeing Jesus in the pre-incarnation glory, and that John would have seen Jesus in his post-resurrection glory. But it's so beautiful to see God appear himself to Daniel in the midst of Daniel's hurt. Like, that's the point that I want to make to you, that Daniel is hurting right now. And it's so amazing to see Jesus be there in the midst of Daniel's brokenness, in the midst of Daniel hurting, amidst Daniel's heart is weighing heavy. And I can tell you that it would be like God to do something like this. And so number 2, what I think is that God brings encouragement to those who serve him. Like, God brings encouragement to his people. And so what are you going through today? What is drowning you today? What has broken you today? What has overwhelmed you today? Because you have to know that God is near, never distant. He's never far, and he's never abandoning those people who are choosing to serve him. And so it says in verse 7, I, Daniel, was the only one who saw this vision. Those who were with me, they did not see it, but such terror overwhelmed them that they fled and they hid themselves. So I was left alone gazing at this great vision. He says, I had no strength. My face turned deathly pale, and I was helpless. And then I heard him speaking. As I listened to him, I fell into a deep sleep, and my face to the ground. Like, I think this is so powerful that he can handle it. And so what you see from Daniel is he's seeing the Son of Man, he's seeing God, he's seeing Jesus, and he just faints. Like, it's just so overwhelming, this overwhelming power, this overwhelming perfection and righteousness. It just causes him to pass out. And it seems like in this moment, the Lord sends an angel to wake him up. And it'd be just like the Lord to do something like this. But it says, verse 10, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. He said, Daniel, you who are highly esteemed, consider carefully the words I am speaking to you. And stand up, for I have now been sent to you. And when he said this to me, I stood up trembling. Like, it's just like Jesus to be able to send help when we are in need. And then verse 12, it says, and he continued, do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to them. And then he explained something to Daniel that Daniel has never heard before. Like, this is so new to Daniel. He's never seen this. He's never heard this. And it says in verse 13, but the prince of Persia, the Persian kingdom, resisted me 21 days. An angel says this. He says the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me for 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me because I was detained. And there with the king of Persia. And now I've come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future, for the vision concerns a time yet to come. Now, before I jump into this, you have to know I'm not some conspiracy theorist, and if we've seen all these things that have happened come true that have happened in the time of Daniel, that happened in the time that Daniel wasn't alive and present, like all this has come true, this doesn't limit us to believe what is happening right now. This angel is telling Daniel about spiritual warfare, something Daniel had no clue about. And so this is what he's saying. Persia has this spiritual prince. This prince is not a person, but it's actually a high-ranking demon whose job is to order the affairs of Persia and to work against the plans of God in Persia. And so Satan has created an army of demons who are assigned to countries and who aim to stump God's plans in those places. So this demon was doing all he could to hold back God's plans in Persia. See, a lot of times we think that this life is about us. Like we think it's all about us, but can I tell you, it's not. This is why Paul says, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. This is why he says, don't follow the ways of this world and the ruler of the kingdom of the air. This is what Daniel was saying in Daniel chapter 9 when he says the 77s. Do you remember this? The 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression. That God is going to bring just absolute rebellion to an end. These demons won't be ruling over countries like this anymore. These demonic forces are assigned to Persia and to Greece and every country that exists today, including the United States. These demonic forces are assigned to Persia and Greece. Like, I don't want you to miss it. In every country that exists today, including the United States. See, people aren't the enemy. It's the demonic forces that are. And so our struggle, it isn't against flesh and blood, but it's with Satan and the demonic forces. So back to 13, it says, but the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. And then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me because I was detained there with the king of Persia. So church, what we have to know is that there are demonic forces fighting against the plan of God, but there are also godly forces fighting for God, which means that there are constant battles that are happening around us all the time that we don't even see, that the demon forces don't want you to serve God, and the angels of God are fighting for you to serve the Lord. And so let me ask you a question. Who's winning in your life? Who are you serving? What captivates your thoughts? What holds you captive of your actions? Who do you follow? In verse 15, he says, while he was saying this to me, I bowed with my face toward the ground and was speechless. Daniel was just so overwhelmed. And then in verse 16, it says, then one who looked like a man, he touched my lips, and I opened my mouth. And I began to speak, and I said to the one standing before me, I am overcome with anguish because of the vision, my Lord. And I feel very weak. How can I, your servant, talk with you, my Lord? My strength is gone, and I can hardly breathe. Daniel, again, is just overwhelmed. He's in awe of what he's hearing. And he doesn't think he should be in this angel's presence. And he doesn't have any strength. And so it says in verse 18, again, the one who looked like a man touched me and gave me strength. Do not be afraid, you who are highly esteemed, he said. Peace, be strong now, be strong. And when he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, speak, my Lord, since you have given me strength. So he said, do you know why I've come to you? Soon I'll return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I go, the prince of Greece will come. But first I will tell you what is written in the book of truth. The angel's like, I'm fighting for you. Right now, I'm battling the prince of Persia, but Greece is coming and the demonic forces are coming with it. A lot of us today, we find ourselves serving things that will one day fade away, that may be even overran by the enemy. My plea with you today is to serve the Lord. It's to serve the Lord, to prioritize your life in serving Jesus, not serving the enemy, not hating your brothers and sisters, not gossiping against one another, not murdering one another, not racially dividing yourselves against one another, because the fight ain't even between us. The fight isn't between flesh and blood, and yet the fight is against the enemy. So don't fight for this American dream. Don't fight to have all these amazing things that will one day fade away, but serve the Lord. So my question to you today is, who do you serve? Are you serving the Lord, or are you serving the enemy? Have you moved to Jerusalem to help God build his church, or are you still stuck in Babylon? Let's pray. God, thank you so much for this day. God, thank you so much for everything that you've done for us, Lord. I just pray that we just will serve you with all of our hearts and with all of our minds and just with our life. Lord, we love you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Hey, I hope you guys have a good day. Always remember, be a bridge. See you next week to finish out the series, and then we start our Christmas series. Let's go!